Okay, can we get started? I think everybody's more or less in their seats. So on behalf of the organising committee, I would like to welcome you to Cape Town and to the UCT GSB Conference Centre in particular. So I'm just going to give you a few brief announcements and housekeeping notices, and then I'm going to hand over to the president of the OR Society to give the opening address. Okay, so you will have been aware by now that there are just two venues in which everything takes place. It'll be this one, the auditorium, where the plenaries happen, and this will also be one of the parallel sessions. The other parallel venue is Lecture Theatre 7, and that's in the GSB building, which is opposite this building. As if you're walking into this building, it's the building behind you. When you go into that building, the GSB building, it's the door immediately or the entrance on the extreme left. And if you go straight ahead, you'll hit Lecture Theatre 7. I don't think you can go wrong. Okay, the LOC members will have pink name tags like these, or there are also green name tags for the student helpers. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask somebody with a pink or a green tag. Toilets are available on all the floors. On this floor, they're sort of down the sides of the venue. Okay, we're very lucky to have 3 keynote speakers, and they will be addressing us during 3 plenary sessions. The opening plenary is by Lisa Sholton, who will be introduced to you shortly. The mid-conference plenary is to be delivered to you by Helena Ramalino, who some of you already met at yesterday's tutorial. And the closing plenary will feature Sarah Grobelaar, who will wrap up the conference for us on Wednesday. There's a 4th plenary, which is the annual general meeting of ORSSA, and that takes place at 3:30 tomorrow. Apart from the plenaries, all the talks are organised into 2 parallel streams during the conference. In each session, there will be technical support available. In this venue, the auditorium, Ryan is our technical help, and Romario is the technical help in Lecture Theatre 7. So they'll copy your presentations onto the conference laptops at the beginning of each session. So just make contact with them right at the beginning of your session. Online delegates will have access to each of the sessions through a Teams meeting, which is happening in parallel, and they may choose to participate in the questions and discussions after each talk. On the issue of language, the program committee chose to allow on request presentation of papers in any of the official languages of South Africa, with the proviso that the slides are presented in English and that questions are taken in English as well. This was done in an effort to increase diversity and to encourage participation as much as possible. Social program of the conference. There are 2 further activities besides the welcome breakfast, which you've all taken part of already, I presume. There's a social mixer in the form of drinks and snacks this evening at Mitchell's Scottish Ale House. And there is a map in your conference bag which shows you exactly how to walk to that venue. But again, if you're not too sure, just ask somebody with a coloured name tag. Also in your conference bag are 2 drinks vouchers, which you will use to obtain your drinks this evening. Then tomorrow evening is the gala cocktail evening on the rooftop terrace where we had the breakfast. It starts at 6:30. Cocktail attire, as you choose to interpret it, is the order of the day. The seating will be cafe style, so you sit where you feel comfortable and you mingle as much as you wish during the evening. And then the annual ORSSA Awards will also be made during this evening. Wi-Fi is available throughout the venue, so those of you who have access to EduRoam, you can log into EduRoam, or you can get the details of the hotel Wi-Fi by just asking at reception where you registered. Just a couple of other things. In the program, there are a couple of errors that I picked up. Page 16, It's just quite a minor thing, but it does say that the plenary B is happening on Wednesday when in fact it's happening on Tuesday, but it is correct in the main program. So just at the top of page 16, plenary B is happening on Tuesday. Also, you will see that the lunch venue is listed as the Stonebreakers restaurant. It is in fact going to be on the ground floor as you came in and where you registered. There's a big open space there where the lunches will be laid out and the teas. Session chairs should just notice that I did email you the instructions, but there is a list in each venue in case you'd forgotten. And your notices, the 5-minute warning will be given by the session chair when you have 5 minutes left to talk, the 0 when you should be stopping, and the stop when you've run out of question time. Okay, so that's the end of the housekeeping bit. I now have pleasure in handing over to David Clark, the president of ORSSA, to do the opening address.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to see everyone back in person. And thanks very much, Leanne, and to the LOC. I mean, that's been a great start to the conference. The tutorial sessions were a fantastic warm-up, so very nice. When I have slides, I will start. I hope you guys all had a good breakfast. Thanks, Discovery. There, I gave you a shout out. I can probably do the talk without the slides, if necessary, but but I may not remember all of it. Thank you. So there's so many great speakers coming up, and also our plenary speakers, that I thought I would at least have a talk whose title you couldn't pronounce, because then maybe you could remember it. So that is my title. You can decide how you want to interpret that as you want. So, I mean, the last 2 years have been really challenging. We've had a lot of disruptions and changes to several systems. Healthcare has been a big one over the last 2 years. The supply chain, I mean, you know, the supply chain is having problems when Forbes magazine actually has an article about OR in it. You know, they're like quite desperate to find people to try and help them solve the problems. Energy, I mean, energy is a problem here, and it's a problem around the world now. And then climate change is changing a lot of things as well. So like what, you know, processes that we were comfortable with in the past are being disrupted by various factors. And this ability for us to adapt to them, I think, is a key thing that OR provides to businesses and to people who need to make decisions to keep their operations running efficiently and effectively and getting the right services to the right people. So in a way, although we have many challenges in the world, this is a great time to be in OR, I think, because we can really have an impact with the work that we do. And, you know, technology and the data side of things has reached a point where I think a lot of the tools and the mathematical disciplines sitting behind them are really, can really make substantial impact now. So the thing with being in, let me see if I can go back one. Being part of the society, though, is that you deal with a lot of people who just have different attitudes to OR. So we have the AHA people, which is everyone in this at this conference. You're all very lucky. I hope you're all smiling. because you already understand the benefit of OR, you understand the benefit of modeling, of having good data, you understand that there can be an impact and you can make things more efficient. So that's a good place to be. The other people we engage with are the people, because they kind of know about OR, maybe from the side, they're doing different disciplines, but they're interested, and you can usually make them more interested by just explaining the sort of things that people in OR do. You get the people, like these people just don't know what OR is. They've never heard of it. They don't know what it is at all. And unfortunately, this is like the majority of people that I come in contact with. And people, across the board, right? I mean, in companies, it can be people from operations all the way up to directors. I see a lot of this. This is the dominant position. A more sort of interesting one is the meh. Like, I've heard of OR, I've done some optimization, I've seen what you guys do, and I'm not really convinced you can help me. So this group is like a really tricky one. And they are obviously, and they can be sometimes the guys who like really block projects that you think could be really successful going forward, because they have to make a final decision on whether a project goes ahead, and for some reason they think that you can't make an impact, even though you've already often shown a lot of right, okay, I forgot I had all of these slides. Damn. But anyway, we've gone through all of these. So this can't work for me because is a big one, right? And it's often an implicit thing. Like, people don't come out explicitly and say, this can't work for me because, but in the back of their head, they're making up a lot of excuses around why this is not going to work and why they're not going to fund your project. And why why they are saying this is, I think, something we need to try and address. And this is why I think the society is really important. So and our people, I mean, they are close to being part of our sort of understanding of what we can do with data. So you don't even have to be part of OR necessarily, but part of the bigger data science, data modeling, applied maths, anything that's looking at solving problems rigorously. And, there's lots of ways to contact and connect with these people through the different societies that we have. So in South Africa, there's ORSSA. And then, you can always look and pass them off to AFROS and Euro and I4s to see what people in operations research do. And so they're almost on the fence, and they're usually quite excited when they see these things. And then obviously Informs and the OR Society have some really great content that you can point people to say, hey, this is what it's about. If you don't believe me, go and look at these clever people. Maybe you'll believe them. So where am I supposed to point with this? Oh, there we go. So the mayor people I'm going to talk about the most, because they're the most problematic. And I start with blaming several people. Like, I'm blaming the Prussians, who started with no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So these are just general things that I think people have read or seen or heard. And it's quite, when these people were writing this stuff, they were writing it within the context of very complex situations. But people just see one line. And so they think, well, I agree with this guy. He was a Prussian field officer. Clearly planning, you can give me the greatest plan, but in execution, I can't carry out your plan. So I'm not. We've got to mention Carl as well. I mean, he's kind of the first person who really introduced the idea of the fog of war, which we really see in business a lot, right? Like, what is actually happening on the ground? What's happening in execution? How do we get data? This has been like a big ongoing thing. Like, how do we have visibility of what we're doing and whether we're having an impact, and what's really going on the ground? The Americans are also there. So old Dwight Eisenhower, he said plans are worthless. And if you stop there, you might have a really poor opinion of anyone who works with trying to make better plans. But then he, obviously finished it with planning is everything. And then that's this idea that's really powerful in OR, that you don't even have to execute on the plans to get value from them. Just understanding and building the models provides you with a huge amount of value, and can give you a deal of insight into possible changes that you would like to make. even if you can't access them. And then we have the British George Box, statistician, actually quite famous statistician. I'm assuming you've all heard of him. All models are wrong. Again, like a lot of people just stop there. All models are wrong. You know, like why are you guys coming with all your clever techniques and making my life difficult, asking for all this data that I thought I had, but turns out I don't. But some are useful, right? And again, people, this is a very subtle comment that was directed to a group of people who actually understood the subtleties in this comment and where models are, you know, where you have to be careful with what you say you can do with modeling. But that was directed to a very, like I say, very specific audience. But in the general conversation, when people see this, they kind of think, well, you know, these guys said you can't do what you're doing, so I'm not going to listen to you. So these are the things, right? Like, you know, they simply don't care about better solutions. That's quite a valid point to take. Like if your operations are working fine and you're making the profit you want to make, like why go to the effort of improving it? Like you actually don't have to at that point. Like I feel like there might be an ethical responsibility to actually try and improve things, but you don't have to care about better solutions. Or you don't believe that anyone can do better than you because, like, you know, your problem, like no one else has ever seen it. And I'm the only person who's got the expertise, or my team's the only one person who has the expertise. And if you come in from the outside, you're never going to understand what I'm doing. And so there are various things here that are bandied about, like the complexity of the problem, time constraints, scale, poor data. And past experience with bad projects can be like a really key thing that can hurt you when you're trying to advocate for the discipline and for doing work in this type of field. Time is like one of the really nice ones in OR because time is such a scarce resource regardless of what you're doing, both in operational practice and in terms of trying to solve problems. So it's like a really important thing. And I think one of the nice things about operations research was that this was a really fantastic piece of work that was done in terms of explaining the complexity of algorithms and how we think about complexity and how long they run. And the Operations Research Society, which was also called ORSSA at the time, Society of America, it's now changed its name to Informs. They were the first society to award this piece of work an award. So they awarded it the Frederick Lanchester Award, which is obviously for best contribution, because operations researchers know that understanding how to do things efficiently, you know, whether it's in operations or whether it's your solvers that you're trying to run, is a really important thing to do and something that you've always got to think about when you're working in this field. And then just out of interest, the 2021 one's been awarded to this publication from the MIT guys, Machine Learning and under modern optimization lens. It just shows you that operations research just will scavenge whatever the best techniques are that are out there and put them to use. So I see use of machine learning and all the new disciplines coming out in AI. It's just another tool for operations research people to start to incorporate into their planning systems and scheduling systems and trying to make things more efficient. And time machines are great things. They're not just about making things quicker. They actually allow you to see into the future, right? So if you can give someone a solution in 10 minutes rather than 4 hours, well, it means that they don't have to start running the problem with the data they have 4 hours before they need it. They can actually wait, let the future arrive, and then 10 minutes before start running the application with all the data that they've now acquired, the new data in that 4 hours. And in operations that are very dynamic, a lot can change in 4 hours. In big e-commerce systems and ordering systems, being able to plan fast allows more orders to come through the system that you can take into account before you start doing your runs. And if you don't want to see into the future, you can actually plan for multiple futures if you can do things quicker. So instead of having one 4-hour run, you might have a whole series of quicker runs that are looking for slightly different variations to see how your planning might be affected in the future. And that's something that Eisenhower was touching on about, the planning is important, even though the plan that you had might not be the one that you end up executing on. What are the other things people like really struggle with when we talk to them, right? It's just good software. Like, you have a great model, but is there any software that you can actually use to run it? You know, all the integration stuff, this is important stuff. There might be lack of adherence to regulatory requirements. Sometimes you produce great looking models and solvers, and then you realize that you didn't actually include all the stakeholders, which happens very often and is very easy to do. And there's like some regulatory requirement, like driver hours, people actually have to take a rest when they drive. Yeah. And that can really sort of throw a spanner in the works. I think we're getting much better at that because our understanding of the environments that we're working on has improved. And then there's just the ROI for decision-making systems. A lot of people sell their stuff for a really exceptional amount of money, and that can put off dealing with clients who are coming in with I think, more reasonably priced products, because they've actually just been put off by the fact that some systems you pay a lot. And if you can't justify that, and people, this comes back to this idea of having a bad experience with optimization systems. And things that people often will say is that, my model worked well on all of these benchmarks, but what we still really need is benchmarks that are like at industry scale. Like, we really need big benchmarking things. I can, my little model with maybe 10 vehicles is running fine, but then when somebody says, well, I've got like 50 vehicles, we need to know like how good are our solvers with these bigger industry scaled problems, and we need to be able to compare them. And the problem is that it ties into this greater transparency of success in the industry, because as soon as you think that you've got a successful solution, you want to protect it, right? And then we all end up signing NDAs, and we can't share anything that we've done, right? And so there's probably a lot of good work that's just trapped, and we can't, and companies don't want to be compared sometimes with each other because they've spent a lot of money. And if you come along and say, I think I can do better, then they've got to try and justify all of these other costs. So there are all of these subtle things that make life difficult when you're trying to give people a better solution. So one thing I like is this idea of iterative local trust. And this is this idea of like taking people very slowly through the process of understanding why they should trust you. And this is something that societies can also learn from, and this is why they're great networking events. Like, how do you build trust in your system? How do you get your clients to trust you? We really struggle with this, and I know because like I speak to a lot of people, and it's really difficult to get a good sort of prototypes even. And even when you do POCs, people still think, well, it was just a POC, it's probably not going to work in production. And you can very easily get cut out of the next phase. So learning how to do this, and even as a society, trying to educate the rest of people so that it's easier for you guys when you go out to them, so that they already know, oh, these guys know what they're doing, I should listen to them. I think that's part of what we try and do as a society. And then I think there's also a social impact part, that, you might be running a really big system. It might be a government system. It might be any big company. I think there are social reasons to try and do the best that you can. I spoke about the thing that some people, if you can be just satisfied with what you have. But I think we need to keep challenging people in the field to try and do the best that they can, because I think ultimately we all benefit when we can do things quicker and more efficiently, and have time to do other things, or make sure that everyone gets better service or cheaper service for that matter. So yeah, I think I didn't want to take up too much time. Also trying to reach out to other groups, because people often, when they're reading about, modeling and things like that, you'll see things like data science and machine learning. And so we've started these special interest groups that we're trying to kick off that allow people to focus more on those topics. And the first two we have is data science and quantitative finance, and we're hoping to grow that. I mean, there are lots of nice little, I think, special interest groups that we can help and support for people that are working in really specific fields. So yeah, that's us, and I think it's a fantastic society. I really enjoy the problems that we tackle, and it's really nice to be part of a community that works in this space. So thanks very much. I hope you guys all enjoy the conference and all the excellent talks that will be coming.
Thank you very much, David, for those thoughtful words at the beginning of our conference. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our first plenary speaker, Lisa Scholten. Is that correct? Scholten? Scholten, okay. Who has come all the way from TU Delft in the Netherlands to be with us for our conference. Lisa is an assistant professor at the policy analysis section of the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management at TU Delft. Her work focuses on decisions in water systems. She holds an engineering degree in urban and industrial water resources management with a minor in East Asia China Studies from TU Dresden, Germany, a PhD degree from ETH Zurich, Switzerland, and recently completed an executive MSc in behavioural science at the LSE of United Kingdom. Thank you very much, Lisa. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leanne, for your kind words. And thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about work that we've been conducting at TU Delft. And one project I'm going to be presenting is actually still from the work in Switzerland. But before I can start, I actually would need to feel the pulse a little bit where you are in terms of transdisciplinary research, so I know how much I need to explain or not. Who of you engages regularly in transdisciplinary research? If you could lift your arm, please, lift your hand. Okay, there's a few, but the minority. Okay, who of you practices both soft and hard OR? Okay, great. Who practices only soft OR? Perfect. Thank you. And does anybody happen to work in the water sector? Okay, good. Then I know more or less where I am. If there's anything that you cannot understand and it hinders you in understanding my talk, please lift your hand and ask. Don't wait until the end. I am half German, half Dutch. That is a bit of a fatal mix in the sense of being diplomatic. So I do like to speak my mind. And if I were to say anything that makes you feel like I'm stepping on your toes, that is without intention, and I'm happy to kind of sort it out afterwards. But I'll try my best to stay diplomatic. Obviously, not all of this is science, but not all of it is hard science. I'm actually going to speak quite a lot about more the soft side of things, or what I would call the tough side of things, because transdisciplinary OR, for me, has been very much linking hard OR and soft OR, and using the soft OR to enable hard OR that makes an impact. But let's see. Where do I need to point? There. I'm going to first start with OR for water and other real-world challenges. My lens is chiefly the water sector, but at my faculty we also work on energy, health, transport and logistics and so forth. So I think I have a bit of an idea of what's going on in those fields, even if I do not work there in depth. Then what I would call the trials and tribulations that I've gone through with my teams, different people in applying transdisciplinary OR in the real world. So TD, I use that for transdisciplinary, some reflections on why that might have been, and some useful frameworks, I think, to understand, to explain, and to continue learning and developing, and maybe some tips for you as well, depending on where you are on your journey. And finally, zooming out in conclusions. So I think the first thing under the topic of this conference being active, agile, and inclusive, I think in terms of transdisciplinary research, we also need to consider that it's not binary. Very often transdisciplinary research is considered kind of the coming together of academics or scientists and practitioners to work on a problem together, and that then the knowledge or the findings or the results that are coming out of it would benefit both science and practice. And that then if there's no practice engagement, the idea is that that's not transdisciplinary research and everything else is transdisciplinary research. But of course, there is a spectrum, and the spectrum has different dimensions. And I would say the dominant dimension, and I'm here citing this paper by Jan et al., which is a recent paper that I personally consider very valuable reading, especially if you're not so familiar yet. And this dimension is about the degree of practice engagement that goes from really almost no practice engagement towards full engagement with practice. And that also often implies that either the project, if it is a project, or the activities are led by science and scientific questions and problems, or they are led by practice and practical questions and problems. And yeah, obviously that maps quite well with what could be considered academic non-TD research, and then on the other extreme, practice-oriented research, where there's actually a discussion of whether that is TD, so transdisciplinary research, or whether that's something else. I'm not going to have that discussion here, but if you're interested, I'm happy to do that in a coffee break. So kind of a light touch TD intervention would be practice consultation. We could go towards selective involvement, for instance, for eliciting preferences or eliciting expert judgments or other aspects. And we could have the ideal typical transdisciplinary research, where kind of science and practice are more or less on an even. And I will try to present 4 projects to you. I need to see how we're doing for time, that are somewhere on this spectrum. Actually, project 2 was planned to be pretty much an ideal typical transdisciplinary research, but the situation did not at all allow for it. So it ended up being or becoming a practice consultation. So there are a lot of failures there to learn from, and I'm not going to shy away from presenting them to you. Then there is one project that is pretty much practice-oriented research, I would say, in the last one that I would consider ideal typical research. There are other dimensions, and I think I do not have the time to go into much depth, but just for your awareness. Obviously, there are low transdisciplinary and high transdisciplinary engagements that differ in the degree to which they are being applied or even actionable. Then also in terms of whose problem definition rules or drives, I've already commented on that. Then the practitioner interaction is often one-off in the more low transdisciplinary types. And it is usually short-term and long-term engagements in the high transdisciplinary work. And I think all of you who have a little longer experience and who do work in transdisciplinary research, you might find that kind of one project with one partner leads to another project and another project. And that's how these long-term collaborations happen. The practical implementation is much more likely to happen in high transdisciplinary research. And the same is for societal productivity and impact. However, there's a very, very important trade-off, and that usually comes with a little less of what we consider academic productivity, meaning publications, or sometimes even grant money and so forth. But I think the tides are changing because we're dealing with very, very complex problems, and transdisciplinary research is considered more broadly, not only in OR, one of the ways to not only find good solutions, but to actually make change through the process of engaging in TD research. And in the water sector, we certainly, I think, need that as much as in other sectors. You might all be aware that there's still insufficient sanitation across the globe. So about 1 in 3 people on this earth do not have access to safe sanitation, also leading to vast pollution and other aspects or problems in terms of public health, environmental situation, condition, and so forth. We also have a sustainable development goal on clean water and sanitation. Clean water is also still an issue, but a little less than sanitation. What I also should say actually is that about 80% of wastewater produced on this planet is not treated. So we're having a massive problem in that regard, even though all the technology is available, and it's not even that expensive. Another problem that's very high on the agendas, obviously, is the changing patterns in terms of distribution and availability of water, droughts, flooding. We have subsidence problems due to over-extraction and so forth. yeah, Europe is just undergoing, you could say, a 1 in a 500 years drought. You haven't seen something like this. Last year, we had a massive flooding. I'm sure you've read the news about the situation in Pakistan. Yeah, these things really make me think about how can we foster or use OR and transdisciplinary research to advance climate action. Then this is something that is not often thought about, but still the centralized water supply and wastewater systems are pretty much the gold standard around the globe. And in places where there's no such supply, the aspirations often are to have these. But actually it is extremely expensive and difficult to operate and maintain them. And in OECD countries where we have old systems, we now need to replace them, but replacement is even more expensive than building them in the first place. So there's a lot of issues with that in terms of reliability and also in terms of ensuring sustainable cities and communities. And lastly, there's also one that's close to my heart and probably to you because you have an amazing ocean. And yeah, that has to do with the situation of life below water, where unfortunately, yeah, quite many of the ecosystems in the water and on land are suffering and might be reaching their tipping point soon. Then there's also the issue that our population continues to increase and our demands on water and energy and food increase, and simply we do not have enough resources to meet those demands, and they interact. And there's many more SDGs. Essentially, the point that I want to make is that water is so basic or so fundamental to almost everything that we do. Also our economy, to the way our environment works. Yeah, that there's so many problems. And it turns out that actually we do have a lot of technology already to address it. We know how to manage and operate that technology. But very often it's other reasons that lead to us not having a very good water management. And very often this comes down to decision-making or water multi-level governance gaps. No time to go through all of these, but very difficult ones are the policy gap, where there is different organizations that lead to a very fragmented management of these systems, very different regulations, goals might be different. Yeah, and often collaboration is very difficult as well, different goals. But then if you have a watershed, a river, the river doesn't care about whether it flows through, you know, the city of Durban or Cape Town or Munich or whatever, and whether downstream it's, I'm just saying something, whether downstream it's Vienna or Bratislava. The river just happens to be there, but the administration of our water, the layers, it doesn't overlap with the boundaries of the water, and that's causing a lot of issues. And obviously the funding gap is a very big issue next to many others. Very often we could summarize the situation as wicked or a mess. And there's other dualisms that are used, like unstructured problems or ill-structured problems and so forth. And obviously my training as a water engineer did not prepare me for this. I knew how to calculate dams and structures and dimension water pipes and what the cost would be and what the impact would be on the environmental ecosystem and a lot of things. But I could not deal with anything that had to do with the social, technical, and socio-environmental dynamics. And that is when I ended up reading about OR. And when I actually got really interested in, isn't there a science on how to improve decisions? And I actually read something like this, like the statement by the OR Society, which is operational research is a scientific approach to the solution of problems in the management of complex systems that enables decision makers to make better decisions. It sounded too good to be true. So obviously I jumped on it, and I was really lucky to be able to do a PhD that was linking OR in the sense of decision analysis, multi-criteria decision analysis, with mathematical modeling and a focus on water systems. It was only later, actually, that I learned that there are also a bit more complex ways to categorize problems. So not only tame or untame or a mess or wicked, but that we actually can distinguish two very important dimensions. And they can be, on the one hand, the horizontal axis that you have here, that is the degree of technological certainty or the consensus of knowledge about what a good solution would be or what the outcome would be. And the other one is about the degree of social consensus or consensus on values. And if you happen to have, I already mentioned untamed and tamed. So untamed would be the situation when it's not clear what's the best technology, or there's no consensus on knowledge or large uncertainties, and there's no social consensus, possibly a lot of politics. That is when we're in the untamed space. But if the degree of consensus is large, then it is actually what we would call an untamed technical or moderately structured problem. So then actually you can tackle it quite well, I think, with OR approaches, just as we could the tamed ones. And the opposite is true if the certainty or consensus on knowledge is large in terms of the technological aspects, and it's only on the consensus side, the social consensus side, that we might need some work. And you can derive strategies from this. Actually, usually the aspired strategy is to reduce or to move from either of these three towards a tamed or structured problem, because then the main thing that we need to do is to provide information, maybe run a model to get better information or to have more trust in it. If we need to move from small consensus on knowledge towards a large consensus on knowledge, then we can use OR methods or other methods to reduce uncertainty. And the same actually is true for social consensus. And that is especially the soft OR methods that can help us with this, when we need to think about how do we design a social process to aid achieving this a certain degree of consensus. And if we're in the untimed, unstructured area, then it is, of course, a little more difficult, because that is when we need what could be called an interactive socio-technical analysis. If I now map, and it's a very rough mapping, so don't shoot me if your favorite technique here does not have all the boxes marked as you would like. There is a paper that did a cluster analysis by Romero Silva and De Leo that looked at what are typical publication clusters of methods and topics in OR. I only took out the methods and are indiscriminately aggregated some of them together. The key message that I would derive from this is that in terms of creating consensus and interactive socio-technical analysis, there is something, but maybe that is a little less. Most of the methods focus on something else. Let's get towards trials and tribulations. Let's start with the Sustainable Water Infrastructure Planning Project. That is what I did my PhD and a postdoc in Switzerland. The problem was essentially that the infrastructure deterioration for water and wastewater systems was unknown, but they knew that a lot of investments would need to be made, and they wanted to find out, on the one hand, the reliability of the system, and on the other hand, the required investments. And then also, since if the system has to be replaced, that would also be an opportunity for changing and perhaps having more decentralized approaches, dealing with rainwater on the private property, dealing with firefighting water differently, and so forth. And then we used MCDA, but mostly as a process, not only as an analytical method. And there were a couple of 3 really large full-day stakeholder workshops, then a lot of interviews, online surveys, and so forth to do this. And that was obviously worked together with a number of colleagues from Switzerland. What we did, this is kind of the typical scheme for MCDA, but actually, full disclosure, there's something more that we did. There were a few case studies, and since it was a bit risky to put, 2 of us were PhDs, 2 PhDs on a very politically hot topic or hot potato, we picked the case study that was the most politically tame, and actually there was no real decision to be made. But people were happy to be informed whether they could do something maybe better if they wanted to. And we also defined the problem that we were going to explore with those willing stakeholders to suit a little bit also what we were interested in the research. We had 29 key stakeholders, 44 objectives and 4 scenarios, so it very fast got a bit big, not the typical MCDA application still. 11 options, if you want to assess them and model them under 4 scenarios, that makes 44. A lot of engineering modeling and design, risk analysis, expert elicitation, these type of things. We really needed simplified approaches because there was no way I could elicit preferences for 44 objectives. And on top of that, many of them were non-linear and non-additive and all of this. There was a very high sensitivity of the results to the modeling and preference parameters. So it was difficult to find no-regret solutions. And we were trying to establish some consensus, but you can, of course, ask yourself consensus on what if these people were not coming together to make a decision in the first place. So what worked? We actually had very many high-impact publications, and I really think we made a good contribution to science. We had quite good practitioner interactions, and I really think they learned something from it with regards to options that they might be thinking about. But yeah, again, there was no real decision to be made. And some of the more, I would say, harder OR insights, they actually made it in very simplified format into guidelines for in Switzerland and Germany for asset management and also some multi-criteria models. What didn't work, there were too many criteria to elicit, but I think what's more important is that none of these options were adopted because obviously they didn't really meet directly the interests of these stakeholders or their needs that they had in their daily lives. And essentially the stakeholders got some learning from us and maybe the enjoyment also of being involved in research, which some of them stated they really enjoyed it. And we got support in terms of the research and how they would relate to it. A second project, this one, actually two projects. This is in the Netherlands, and it's also about water infrastructure, in this case, wastewater infrastructure and the asset management of this, which currently is very much intuition-based. And we wanted to make it more evidence-based, based on the values of the decision makers and the risks. There are two projects. One project that is very, very heavily driven, actually, from the private sector. 50% of the grant money came directly from the private sector through these two foundations. So we had a user committee that contained municipalities, water boards, engineering consultants, inspection companies, everything. And they could make demands on what we would do in our work. And there's a second project that is this practice project where this student, Hala Al-Hamid, wanted to do a professional doctorate in engineering in company at WaterNet, which is a water company that handles water, drinking water, wastewater, and surface water management. And we kind of did the training or the education for free. So all parties contributed. Let me start with the first project. We did it with a couple of people. So the departure point that practice told us was that there's very limited unreliable inspection data. And that was true because the inspections, the way that they're currently done is you have to imagine kind of a CCTV camera that's pushed into the sewer, it takes pictures, and then an operator looks at these images and has a classification scheme, and then kind of, depending on how severe he or she thinks it is, assign a rating, an ordinary rating. And then based on that rating, some prioritization plans would be made for instance, replacement. But there was a lot of human error in these. And we thought we could improve that through automating part of that process. But also this assessment framework itself was rather poor in the sense that defects might be classified, but what that means for performance, like is the sewer still tight? Could it collapse? Something, no link at all. So it was very difficult for decision makers to use this. And we thought we could do something about that. But what I actually thought was really necessary to do was to deal with this misalignment of asset management goals across municipalities who often sit in the same watershed, also to improve the exchange between them, and also, perhaps get exposed to a little more advanced technology than the one that they were using. What we did, well, I essentially told you already. So we set up a convolutional neural network to learn from a few millions of inspection data that we could get hold of, luckily, to partially automate the classification system. Then we had Bayesian belief networks to link causal effects between defects and link that to failure, to data we had about failure or collapse. Derive predictions about risk of failure so that we could feed that into a multi-criteria model, you could say, and from that, sorry, this is not so visible, I think, derive optimal inspection and replacement plans. And what did I forget? Oh, yes, I forget to say that we used SODA methodology for this. There was a big problem with this one thing that I really felt was necessary, that they actually think about how decisions are being made, what technology they are currently using, and possibly this alignment of objectives. And we had a workshop that was, I think in hindsight, pretty much a disaster, because people came and they thought that we were going to present to them. And it was a communication disaster because I thought we had been very clear that we were going to try to do some issues mapping and surface goals. They thought we were going to come and present to them how we were going to automate inspection and take a load off of them and kind of transfer the newest knowledge in through inspection technology. Very soon they realized that was not the case. Two people got really annoyed and very Dutch. They were like, I'm going. They left the room. You continue further. It's then even this colleague there who was pushing in the trolley, he also got, a little bit bored with the situation and he started playing with a laser pointer. You can imagine that I was ready to shoot him afterwards. Anyways, we managed to save the situation thanks to the PhD student, my colleague, who came running in for food. We had a little bit of food. We spoke about, why are we so, why does it not happen? And then we realized, okay, they really didn't want to speak about anything about goals because they thought the goals are defined already in the legislation. We're not in a position to even think about them. They were not even aware about the misalignment of goals across policy documents and all of this. And first of all, they also didn't have any time to deal with that. And they really just wanted to, have less workload and us to help them to get better inspection plans. Wrapping it up, actually, I think we did quite well. We didn't manage to fully automate it, but we could reduce their workload by about 60% of the images that they wouldn't need to look at anymore. The failure models were actually quite decent at predicting loss of water tightness, but they had wanted to know collapse. But since collapses do not happen so often, unfortunately, our models don't perform that well. And we also managed to simplify this assessment framework quite a lot. But unfortunately, that's kind of a European norm. So they cannot just simply apply differently. And also the optimal inspection plans would allow them to either inspect 5 to 12% less with the same effort or overall inspect more part of the network with the same effort. We had a decent publication output, but less than we would have hoped. What didn't work, well, obviously, I told you about this. We also, I think, failed to create insight and tools that fit really the expectations, but also their knowledge and capacity and mindset. I certainly overestimated their capacity to deal with mathematical formulas, terms, and what I considered very simple models. And also, we didn't have time or resources in the project to train companies so that they could, because there are many companies that have very skilled staff that provide consultancy, but just because of the limitations in the project, we also couldn't train them so they could do that. So that was a problem. How much more time do I have? Okay, thank you. And there were also quite a few politics actually within our consortium that I'm not going to delve upon for loyalty reasons, but bridging the disciplinary gap with some of our computer sciences colleagues was very difficult because they thought all this idea of talking to people was pretty much blah, blah. At the end of the problem, we managed to understand each other, but obviously that was a bit late. This project, I think I will skip it a bit because I really want to have more time for the reflections. I think key highlights here was that this lady was really working 2 years in company. So she knew everyone and she was an amazing networker. That's Hala Al-Hamid. And everybody liked her in the company, and she managed to get 8 decision makers to commit their time to a process, a problem structuring process, and to align it with the current strategy formulation of Waternet, which is the biggest water company in the Netherlands. And we also built a task force of 45 experts who were subject matter experts in company or who were going to be the ones implementing the results. And there was quite a process with workshops and then task force work in between, I had actually really hoped we could do some preference elicitation and then alternatives optimization. So the more hard OR stuff, but unfortunately no time. And also with Hala Al-Hamed, she was great at what she did, but I misjudged, again, a misjudgment, her capacity to learn relatively fast new quantitative mathematical methods. So both of this was not possible. And in the end, also the company was quite happy with spreadsheet-based solutions. So that's what they got, actually, spreadsheet-based solutions. But what was probably even more important is that we had this extraordinary buy-in. So we had a full organizational learning going on that we actually hadn't planned for in the beginning. So other than only this assessment model, they really learned, how does this work? How can we discuss it? How can we adapt our strategy? After the project, there was immediate adoption. They've rolled this out to all their 120 drainage areas in Amsterdam, and now they are taking it over for the water supply, and they want to revise the company strategy with it. And yeah, that's the scaling. Yeah, what didn't work, I already told you. Also, I had to do a lot of in-kind work that I didn't account for, so a lot of weekend work, because simply, unfortunately, it's very difficult to find someone with these skills, and somebody has to do it. Also what would require a little bit more developing on, but these people who are very technically oriented, and Hala and I had thought it would be really nice to use soft systems methodology, but they rejected it. They didn't like it. They didn't want to paint pictures and think about which pictures and all of this. And actually cognitive mapping was all right for the issue mapping, but then it also didn't really fit their way of working. They used to work in a very interactive manner, challenging each other, whatnot. So really had to start to use more game-like interventions to deal with it. And no scientific publication, very important trade-off. Big impact, no scientific publication. Maybe if at some point I have time, I might make one of it. This last project, I also cannot go into a lot of depth, but this is about unlocking wastewater treatment reuse and resource recovery in the north of India, where there are a lot of water quality and water availability issues, which was together with also a number of colleagues, and the key researcher, postdoctoral researcher, was Dr. Tara Sahara. And yeah, what we did, similar kind of a combination of problem structuring methods. This was cognitive mapping. Yeah, and then we wanted to do also some portfolio decision analysis. But then COVID happened after a first scoping workshop in India. All the plans of doing on-site workshops fell flat. Also access to our contacts were very limited because they were obviously dealing with a very, very serious health situation that was even more serious than what we had in Europe. So it was a bit challenging, but still, especially this Tara, she was amazing. She managed to generate buy-in by, calling people up and helping their children to submit applications to, European universities, or how to do research or whatever, provide them some other information they wanted. And that also allowed her to do very good analysis about the situational overview. What's the governance situation? Who wants what? Who are the stakeholders in the first place? And we identified three key stakeholder groups. And with those representatives of those, we then carried on to cognitive mapping. What you see here is 3 colors. They represent these 3 stakeholder groups. So the red refer to the government, blue refer to the leather industries, and green to the farmers. So we had quite divergent views of the problem and also of solutions, but it was possible to somehow get them aligned through another iteration. And some of the people, it's a very hierarchical society, wanted more senior people to be involved and consulted. So we did that. Yeah, and then we managed to develop means ends network and to do at least a rudimentary MCDA, I would say. But also in this case, due to COVID delays, no time for a really nice portfolio decision analysis. So we did a qualitative one, which wasn't too bad. Yeah, I think what worked, I spoke about it. What didn't, actually a very big issue for implementation now, because the people we worked with, they would like to implement, but the local government officials would refuse to attend our online conferences or to meet with us. They would make appointments, but wouldn't turn up. And that obviously is because perhaps they do not have an interest in improving the situation. So that's a challenge that obviously exists, but that we didn't have a solution for. And publications are still pending. It's also one of those projects that I think it's decent, but it's not like 15 publications or so. Anyways, reflections, what happened? I think thinking critically about myself, but also about my colleagues. I do think, although we speak about systems, we didn't really use or apply systems thinking in the beginning. I'm very much trained in analytical reductionism, and probably many of you are, as we all are if we go through a more technical sciences curriculum, and even especially in Western countries. That's what our education system does to us. And so essentially that means a system, you can kind of pull, following Descartes, you can analyze a system by dissecting it into its parts, understand the behavior of its parts, and from that you kind of understand the system. But we're missing out on this synthetic holism, which is actually not looking at how does it work, but why does it work? So what are the interactions between the parts that explain the system behavior, and not so much just focusing on the individual parts. So these really need to be linked. But in the beginning, I wasn't even aware of it, and I wasn't able to do it. I think I will skip this, but you can keep it for a reference. Also, in the beginning, we were approaching these systemic problems as if they were complicated, where we could apply standard problem structuring methods and hard OR methods to solve them, where instead we should have had a more nuanced approach. So I think in the India project that worked quite well, and also in the WaterNet project, where we had to accept that some things, even if we wanted to, they couldn't be calculated for different constraints or reasons. And sometimes we calculated them, but we knew that the numbers were probably pretty wrong, but hopefully the right magnitude. And wisdom to know the difference. I hope that we gained it, but others are there to judge. Also something that we do have in the history of OR, but that I actually came across very little in trying to learn about how to tackle these problems. That is how to actually use information about system behavior, and we can map it using system dynamics, and then identify the key intervention areas and levers. So really focusing on what matters and can make a change, and also use that to identify then what are the key stakeholders. Because of course we can deal with stakeholders that have more something to do with this part, but if that's not a key lever of the system, why bother? If we're leaving out maybe those people here, that could really make a difference. And then designing the intervention, that is what I still find the most challenging thing, because there's actually quite little within OR on how to do it. Obviously, we have great books for how to implement problem structuring methods, but still, I think what we might want to add is thinking more about how we can understand behavior and designing for it. No time to go into depth, but choice architecture is a term that refers to the way that we structure and present choices has a very strong impact on the choices that people are going to make, and marketing uses that quite to their advantage. At the core, we have sources of behavior. This is the so-called behavior change wheel. At the core, we have the sources of behavior that can be kind of distinguished into capability, opportunity, and motivation. Part of that being automatic and reflective in terms of motivation, where we often forget the automatic part, and if we're dealing with capability, we often forgetting the psychological part, and if we're dealing with opportunity, we often forget the social part, and that has to do with the social consensus. And then, these other areas, this is made for health policy. It doesn't fully apply to water, but there are all these intervention functions where in OR we like to use modeling or persuasion or education, but there are actually quite a few other interventions that can be very powerful. And lastly, there are policy categories. I also came across a lot of nonsense common sense that used to be my common sense, as in the ability to make good judgment in making decisions and to live in a reasonable and safe way. For instance, how many people believe that behavioral action happens is that there are some facts and some knowledge. These help us to form our attitudes. This leads to decisions and intentions, and action is going to follow. So if we wanted to bring action and change behavior, we just have to provide good information, such as those that our NICE OR models give us, but you're wrong. Education is actually quite inefficient. It does work, but it's very inefficient, and using automatic processing can be much more powerful. Attitudes actually tend to follow behavior because we want to be coherent with ourselves. So sometimes it might be easier to just restructure the environment so people behave differently, like in a social process, and then they might actually not even be reminded of some attitudes that they had towards working with these folks or that folks that they don't necessarily like or agree with. And also intentions actually barely predict behavior. I will skip this, but there's really nice work that shows that actually self-control is a key aspect, and our processes can help with self-control, knowing how to. That is where I think we can complement our processes, not only with OR models, but also with planning tournaments, planning exercises, and so forth. And then in terms of non-stable preferences, actually research suggests that especially if choices are very uncertain and in the future and have not been experienced, people tend to not have preferences. So actually it might not make much sense to do an MCDA with the intention of eliciting preferences. Maybe we need to find a different way to deal with that. Next to choice architecture, emotions also matter, and it's a major explanation for the intention action gap. And also what I'm sure you're aware of after Daniel Kahneman and all those works on nudges and heuristics and biases is that in most situations, we like to rely on simple heuristics and judgments and rules and shortcuts. And I think we might want to take that into account in the design of our processes and in how we use our interventions. This is a very nice paper I would recommend to you, which lines out how not only these paths that are typically included in traditional rational choice models, but also paths that have to deal with emotions and emotions processing and choice could be incorporated by Jennifer Lerner. Then how about groups? Obviously, there are a lot of issues dealing with groups, and these are the 4 key issues that we would want to look into. How about ensuring that also unshared information is discussed, especially in hierarchical settings or where not everybody might have a voice, or where if you have a different information that disproves what seems to be the social consensus of what is a good solution or what is a threat or a problem, that there is a way to voice it. We can manage that and facilitate it through a process. Amplification of errors and cascades also happen in these environments, and we might want to try avoid group polarization. Are you aware of Kingdon's multiple streams framework? Probably not. It's a policy analysis framework, but I think it's really nice in showing that procedural rationality can work, but only if it comes at the right point in time in this policy-making process, where here it's conceptualized as 6 streams, where there is a problem stream, a policy stream, a politics stream, and a technology stream, where people in their respective communities are identifying problems or things that catch their attention that they want to do something about. And that's kind of when agenda setting happens. And then a process might be started. That is where we could come in with a process intervention to formulate policies here being solution, alternatives, so forth, and then ultimately decision-making. And then a program stream would follow for implementation, and hopefully some evaluation would happen. As you can see here is that there is quite some divergence also in between the steps. And that is where what is called processual rationality might be necessary. What is a process that is acceptable for all the stakeholders to realize their goals and their aims, even if we do not agree with them? This is more about the reality that I also don't have time for. In terms of the adaptive process design and management for these really wicked cases, there is very good guidance from systems thinking for social change literature, where we would say there's a first stage where we actually need to ensure there's readiness. In this project where the workshop failed, there certainly was no readiness, and we absolutely failed to build it. Then in this readiness stage, we would need to make sure that common ground is established and that there is collaboration capacity built. And then we have this stage about facing the current reality. Many people might not be aware of what really the current reality is. and might disagree with it, and then that can hinder any steps towards change. So looking into this situation and facilitating system analysis, and then looking at what do you actually want or what do we want, and how can we get commitment towards that by clarifying cost benefits, making a choice. It's going to become a busy slide, I'm sorry for that, but I wanted to make sure you can read it. And then there's a fourth stage, which is bridging the gap, where you focus on achieving this choice, this explicit choice, momentum, learning, and correction. And that is where the mental model shifts might happen. If we're looking at OR methods, I do think that problem structuring methods can help with stage 1. They can also help with stage 2, but we might want to use a little more system dynamics there, or systems analysis and modeling and mapping. It can also help in this fourth stage, when we're understanding how the system behavior is changing. And decision analysis in hard OR with actors, I see it mostly in stage 3, but if you have experience with using it at other stages, I'd be really keen to discuss. I also think that there's a lot of wealth to learn from the group facilitation methods literature for all of these steps. How to engage groups and how to deal with the tricky situations, how to understand mindsets of people and what they might accept or not, how to manage the interactions. Stakeholder analysis and social network analysis are also very useful analytical tools that we could use. Social network analysis is even quantitative and you can model it. And then a little more soft methods, I would call them, or theory of change methods. Agent-based modeling, again, would be a modeling method that's very useful, and action planning and evaluation. These are some really great sources, if you do not know them. Kind of the Bible of group facilitation methods. Let me wrap up. Going through this for more than 12 years now, I really wonder if OR is the science of better and focused at addressing complex problems in the real world and at solving problems in the real world, why did I have to muddle through so much? Because I really tried to find the literature and I really discussed with people and how do you do and what frameworks do you use. And it all seemed to be like, Colin Eden and these people who have a lot of experience. And it's just, it's intuition. It's like, okay, yes, I understand that intuition is an important part, but there must be more than that. And I do think one of the problems also is that the body of OR research is very inter and transdisciplinary, but maybe us as OR researchers, we're sometimes a little less so. So also it is more difficult to exchange about it. This lack of holistic thinking that I had, and also certainly key competencies. I will show a little slide of competencies that have been identified. It's also hard to realize how one is not thinking. Now I can speak, like this very wise lady, I was missing the holistic part, but while I was at it, I couldn't see it, and nobody was going to tell me. There was also very little guidance and mentoring available. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm willing to volunteer a bit of my time if you're busy with difficult processes. And I hope that others who have this experience that you're also willing to share. I do think also at my own workplace, in the Netherlands, it's quite acceptable to, to be different or to be a little odd or to be a little rough, but still, sometimes there were quite important in-group and out-group dynamics that were not going to my advantage. And also in terms of my career advancement, it's only now that I'm, going towards associate professor, and many of my friends are already since 3 or 4 years. How come? Yeah, I've published less. Of course, I've published less. So yeah, it is a very important trade-off, but it also depends on, what do you want to spend your career on. If you're looking at competencies and competence training in OR, I think Omrod, he's written a very nice paper, although his focus was on problem structuring methods. So he unfortunately forgot the hard OR, which I allowed myself to add. But you can roughly summarize it as conducting analysis and knowing the analysis tools. I think that is what most of us teach in our OR education. We might want to think about how to teach process. There is a little bit of work already out there and also published, and also how to appreciate context to design our process and to choose our OR methods. And we're trying to do that in class with my colleague Ido Abraham, who is a hardcore optimizer, and we're having a lot of fun. And but it also doesn't always work out. Where next? Royston, that is the former president of the OR Society of the UK, he was mapping out a few challenges to do. He said we need to accommodate analytics. I think we managed to build in behavior. I feel that's still pretty much underway or needs a bit more development. Coping with system complexity. I do think we're not doing too well for process design and process evaluation. Developing systems thinking. Perhaps we could try to solve a little more by synthesis and not only analysis. Encourage evaluation of our work and maybe share our failures so we can all learn. Enable the training and maybe seek and strengthen more cooperation. I saw that South Africa has a great system dynamics community, and we in Europe have as well. So we're trying to collaborate a little more. And I'm sure you're aware of the behavioral operations research group at Euro, and I really think it's one of the ways forward to further develop this. Let me conclude. My impression is that in OR research, we're very often focused on the analytical methods and aiming to resolve tame problems. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we might be resolving non-problems or scientific problems. It's great also, has also value. But if the aim is transdisciplinary OR, to improve decision-making in practice, then yeah, that's not what we should be doing. I think we would benefit from re-including a lot of insights from the past, from problem structuring methods and systems and design thinking, and develop that further. There's a lot of ground to gain. Focusing on competence building ourselves and others, and really addressing the gaps by doing I would start with a thorough system analysis to identify the key levers. Use behavioral science to understand the hindrances to the desired behavior, process design for change, and then bring in the OR, hard OR modeling and intervention. And depending on where you are in your career, keep in mind that there is a trade-off and see whether you can afford it. Thank you.
That we learn through our failures, but we so seldom share them, and really we very rarely publish them. So, and I just think that it's really, really insightful to share those. And thank you for your generous offer to be a mentor as well. I think it's so hard going into front. It really is untrodden ground very often. So thank you very much. So the floor is open. Questions, I forgot. We're supposed to use the mics so that the questions get recorded properly. So opening the floor for questions.
Thanks. It was a great talk. I think the OR Society could use a bit of your mentoring, especially for us to grow and make these things more aware to more people. In terms of the hard OR, though, I think there's a lot of benefit in the mathematical modeling approach. So is there a way of saying, yeah, I know not everyone understands the mathematics behind it, but if you start to like participate with people and introducing those kind of hard mathematical models in a sort of educational way, do you think you would like, you know, because then the model is like transparent, it's there, like people either agree on that that's correct or they don't. Is that something that you think could work?
Yeah, I actually think it's a very good idea and it could work. We're doing that in a project that I didn't present because so far there's no failure, which is nice. But that works also, I think, because the people we're working with have a relatively high education level. They all are university graduates in technical or natural science or math, even one of them. They appreciate it. And they even think, had we come in with the problem structuring immediately, so we came in with system dynamics and then some optimization model, multi-objective optimization, I think it might even be more acceptable to them because it's now through going through this model that they are discovering actually political implications or how, you know, the optimal solution might not work, or how they do not have the means and they need to involve other stakeholders and so forth. So I actually think it can be very powerful in certain situations.
I resonated so much with what you said that at some point somebody asks you why, and you have to say just intuition, I just know. But I struggle to then trust in myself. How do you know when you are just starting to model the result you want? And when is it intuition and when is it just model solution programming? How do you know when you've crossed that line? Because sometimes you just know something isn't right, but aren't you, yeah, how do you know in yourself? When is it intuition and when is it just fudging the numbers?
That's a very, very tough question. How do I know? I mean, I think sometimes there's this idea of us, you know, having fully using cognition or fully using intuition. And I think it's always both. What I would do, or what we try to do even, is to put checks and balances in the process. So not being the only person doing the modeling, but having it reviewed or doing it with someone else. Also seeking frequent feedback with the client or beneficiary, seeing whether it still, you know, meets their needs and their interests. And yeah, maybe that's one of my cues is when I get too excited about it and I like it too much. That's probably a sign that it's a good moment to ask whether we're still on path or, yeah.
Thanks very much, Lisa. My question, I guess it's also a point that David touched on earlier, is that one of the issues that tends to arise is communication, especially when your audience is potentially less informed around the topic. And I guess moving into topics of risk management, where one of the stakeholders is generally the larger public, do you see that moving forwards, there might be more of a focus on more visual methods, such as like simulation-based methods that can be a bit more easily communicated to the layman?
I feel I cannot really answer this question. It might well be, but it depends so much on the problem you're tackling and who you're working with. I would probably not come in. I mean, you certainly have a toolkit and you have to work from that toolkit. You cannot promise something that you cannot do. But I think I would come in and really ask or say, you know, OR with the science of better. we can help you deal with your problems in very different ways. Tell me what the problem is. And then try to map out, you know, is your simulation modeling suitable? And discuss with the client, you know, this is what we can do. And then you see whether it fits or not.
Next, moving around.
When I ask you a little bit of a difficult question, another one for you to answer is, it was wonderful that the Netherlands project gained so much adoption. That's fantastic when we see that our efforts are actually resulting in practical change. So that's fantastic, and I almost wonder, how can we make that kind of solution more extensible into, say, for example, an African context where we have a lot of infrastructure mismanagement and many of these water issues and corruption in between a good solution and the actual implementation thereof. Do you have any ideas for how we can, of course, we can share the research and publish it, but how can we get it to an implementation level where it makes an impact?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I have the impression that people in practice who have problems do not follow the strategy that academics do, which is searching the literature, but rather, you know, speak with people that they trust. And I wonder if we could, and such programs exist. And I have to admit, I do not know the South African water infrastructure situation very well. But there exists some kind of direct exchange programs where, you know, maybe people from South Africa could come over to the Netherlands and spend some time at a water company there, or somebody from the water company could come here and tell, you know, this is what we did, and these are the challenges we faced, and this we liked, and this we didn't, and that's, you know, what it delivered for us. And you have really good OR people, you know, in your country. Why don't you work with them?
Further question? I have a question, Lisa. So one of the things that's often mentioned about transdisciplinary research is having all these experts in different disciplines. You get new knowledge generation, new ways of knowing get developed. I mean, this sounds wonderful, but in practice, I think very challenging. I just wondered, what's your experience of new knowledge creation?
Yeah, what's my experience? I find it more difficult, to be honest, sometimes with my academic colleagues, and I'm sure they find it more difficult with me than actually with people in practice, because we're so specialized sometimes, and we're so expected to be specialized, and you know, you get into a very certain mindset and ways of analyzing things and language and all of this. Like I got scolded for using prediction, whereas in my faculty we can only use forecast because we're dealing with indeterministic systems and these type of things. So yeah, there is this, I forgot his name unfortunately, but I really liked his book. It's about stretch collaborations. He's done a lot of negotiation work, and it's about how can you engage with people you do not necessarily like or agree with, or speak the same language, and just, you know, let it happen and try to park the emotions and just, you know, go with it and try to look more at what do we gain from trying to do this together. And yeah, hopefully you can convince others of trying it that way as well. But of course, it hasn't always worked. I've had a very, very complex and complicated situation in my former. I used to be at the Faculty of Civil Engineering and Geosciences, and I was not supposed to do anything related to social science. And I'm like, okay, but you know, that's my research combining the two. And it was really challenging. So after 5 years, when I finished my tenure track, I actually requested, it was very political, I requested to be moved to a different faculty. And I have very good colleagues there. We had very good collaborations on all the engineering and hard sciences stuff. No problem. But yeah, on the social engagement, that no way we could understand each other. And it was just too much of swimming against the stream that I decided to move.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. As academics, we're very boundaried. And to try and get academics to collaborate in a way that they produce something which is new outside of both of their boundaries is very hard.
Yeah.
More question. Wait.
Okay, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. And particularly you being a transdisciplinary researcher, working through different departments, I think that's quite fascinating. And the aspect of system dynamics being part of the thinking around the operations research. So one question that I have for you is, you mentioned as a transdisciplinary researcher, it's not easy to publish, or you publish less. Why is it that?
Thank you very much for your question. I think the first one is the time for production, because I mean, in the typical work week, I don't know how much teaching portfolio you have. I have supposedly a rather tame teaching portfolio, but it's like half of my time. There's students to supervise, research to apply for, PhDs, organization work, all of this that fills the other half. And then publications happen during holidays, weekends, or evenings. Or I supervise other people who are the first authors. But then often my work is the work that is, facilitating the process and all of this. So that's what I would have to write up. And I simply choose to also have a life. So it takes a little longer. And I think that's an important reason. But then also the publications that are there, I find it difficult sometimes to position them to a certain audience, and also the review process, I have the impression, is harder than for, the more modeling focused work that we also do.
So thank you so much, because really being a transdisciplinary researcher is quite tough. I'm one of them because I did my PhD as a transdisciplinary doctorate in sustainability, and it's really, really tough. But what I think is that aspect of writing about the process helps in informing how to actually carry out a transdisciplinary research, because you're supervised by people who have not gone through that process, and you're actually producing knowledge and advancing that knowledge about how to do transdisciplinary research. And I really like the way you are able to share the challenges that goes through the transdisciplinary research, not being an easy task. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Well, thank you and all the best. Keep it up.
Any more questions? I think we have time for one more.
Thank you, Lisa, for a very interesting talk. I was quite, I could relate to your comment in terms of the teaching of the soft OR part. I'm also teaching a course where I try to convince computer science students that mathematical modeling and computer science is not the only important thing when you actually try to solve a problem in industry. And I'm having a very hard time convincing him that soft OR is important. So I was wondering if you can share some insight into the way you teach, some tips that you've. So I think a lot of the OR undergraduates especially is very focused on the hard OR and the modeling, the mathematics, but maybe I'm not always sure how to teach the soft OR. And I'm also not sure if the students are ready at that stage. So they come from a very analytical degree program, and now suddenly I'm trying to open up the world of human behavior and psychology and everything. And I just find sometimes that they're not ready for it. So I would love to hear how do you teach?
Thank you very much for your question. One question, how old are your students? Are they bachelor or masters?
They're around 2021.
2021, yeah. Okay. So I have by no means fully figured it out, but usually metacognition is something that develops until or only after somewhere between 19 it might start, or 18 up to 25. So it might be that some of your students are not yet in the metacognitive mindset. Metacognition meaning thinking about your thinking or about your feeling and how it influences your thinking. So that's something where you might need to guide them towards it to get an awareness, first of all. But in terms of things that we do for the teaching, two things that have worked really well. There's something that's called the marshmallow challenge. It's a game. Actually, both are games, and students really like it. The marshmallow challenge is they kind of get spaghetti and a marshmallow and some straps and things, and they need to build a structure. Works very well with engineers, by the way. They need to build a structure, and you mix them in teams with people that they haven't worked with before. Or if you know they do not like someone, make sure they are in a team with that someone that they don't like. No, really. And you set them up for failure, essentially, because they have to try, and there's a competition. It needs to be the tallest tower. And it's really hilarious, because there's also a really nice YouTube video. If you want, I can share all of that material with you. Because then they realize that actually they start jockeying for power and, all these other politics that come in that have nothing to do with what's the optimal solution or, how do you build a structure. And so that's a very powerful game, and it really opens the door to speak about it. And it also, making them what we call consciously incompetent. That they realize that they're incompetent at something that kind of motivates them to learn. And another thing that has worked really well, but it's a bit an oldish game, it's called Bafa Bafa. I'm not sure if you know that one. That's a cultural simulation game where you have two very different cultures. And people are kind of encultured in one, the alpha culture, and there's a beta culture. And the alpha culture, I always mix them up. I think the alpha culture is very hierarchical. There are certain rules of, who you may engage with and how, and they exchange cards and they don't speak. And then there's the beta culture that is like super touchy, hug all the time. They speak a lot of small talk, but you're not allowed to speak about certain things. And then you have kind of ambassadors from one culture go to the other. And the beta culture, they've learned to touch everyone, and they end up in this hierarchical culture where a lot of things are not allowed, and the other way around. So they kind of have a culture shock, but in a safe environment where afterwards you can speak about it. And then these culture shocks, of course, often this has been used in terms of national culture, but we also have different cultures in math and social science and so forth. So that's also been a very powerful game to speak about the social side of things. In terms of process, actually, we use a project management course as a vehicle to look into process and how to design process and how to, different people might take different roles on a team and how that plays out in the process. So yeah, I'm happy to share all these materials with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. It's been so interesting. I've let it carry on way into tea. So we're going to take a break now. Thank you so much for your talk there, Lisa. Tea until 11.
Thank you all very much. And thank you, Leanne.